My name is Jordan Vasquez, and this is my game-based learning plan for my lesson on early hominids. The topic that we're talking about in social studies is early hominids. Specifically, I want students to learn how they can differentiate between early hominid groups, focusing on their key capabilities or things that they were able to do to survive. This is for a 6th grade social studies group, and the length of the lesson should be about one class period, which is about 75 minutes in my school. All the students will need a History Alive textbook so that they can pair read the chapter needed for this lesson. Each student will also be given an early hominid timeline activity sheet, which is attached to this lesson plan, and the technology that will be needed is a Chromebook so that they can access the Kahoot game that will be integrated into the lesson. The unit essential question is, how can understanding the capabilities of early groups of hominids help me to explain how man has continued to survive? And then the more focused lesson essential question is, what capabilities helped hominids survive? The differentiation that will take place is that the students with high reading needs, or the low-leveled readers, are going to work in a small group for the reading, and will be working with a special education teacher. There they can work on tracking strategies and focus on different strategies while reading, such as thinking aloud as you're reading and asking yourself questions at the end of each paragraph. The middle and higher leveled readers are going to partner read using the PALS reading strategy, which is peer assisted learning. Essentially, partner A will be reading the first paragraph while partner B tracks the reading and then provides a summary. And then the two partners go back and forth for each following paragraph. Low-leveled learners will also be working on the timeline activity sheet with the special education teacher in a small group setting. This will all take place in the classroom, just probably at the small group table located in the back of the room. The middle and high-leveled learners, however, will be completing the timeline activity as they read with their partner. The social studies standards are definitely relevant for this activity, as students are developing an understanding of ancient and medieval world history. And they're focusing on early civilizations and people, and the intensified hemispheric interactions as they're talking about where the different groups lived and how they traveled. Students will be able to explain how a timeline can aid in their comprehension of the text, and kind of why it's important to know when the different groups lived compared to each other. They'll be able to identify the 5 groups of hominids and explain the differences between them. The big focus, though, is understanding the differences between their key capabilities and kind of being able to identify the different hominid groups by their key capabilities. Technology definitely plays a role here because students have to be able to know the difference between the 5 hominid groups, and they need to memorize this in a way that's visual to them. So with the focus of the timeline that they'll be filling out while they're reading, and then connecting that to this Kahoot activity game where they're going to be asked questions and they're going to have to quickly refer to their timeline to be able to answer those questions. I think the more you can question the students about the different hominid groups and ask them to make those connections to the key capabilities, the more they're likely to remember them and be able to match them quickly. Unfortunately, with hominid groups, you get these very big, long scientific names that students are not likely to remember. So by students being able to visualize the different hominid groups and focus more on what those hominid groups are known for, which are the key capabilities, they'll have a better time of remembering the hominid groups and being able to kind of match them as needed. The lesson would start with a quick 5-minute warm-up on where students are going to be asked, what are some keys to our survival as human beings today? So in other words, why are we able to survive here on Earth? This gets students thinking about what some of our key capabilities may be, and then we'll backtrack and start talking about early hominid groups and what their key capabilities were and why they were able to survive as long as they did. We'll have a quick discussion where we'll talk about student responses, and then we'll move on to the whole group part where students are going to do a skim through of Chapter 2. During the skim through of the chapter, we're focusing on the pictures, the captions, and the other text features to kind of give us some background knowledge before we even start reading the chapter. Then we're going to discuss her early hominids and provide a background for the chapter. So asking questions like, what are early hominids? When did they live? Where did they live? And what evidence do scientists have that there were early hominids? Then it'll break into the small group and partner work where, depending on the reading level, students will be reading Chapter 2 in the textbook and completing the early hominid timeline activity sheet. I anticipate this will take about 25 minutes to get through the reading and complete the activity sheet with their partner or in their small group. As a group, we're going to review the timeline activity sheet, but I don't want to review it thoroughly because students will get a better shot at going through and doing a review when we do the actual Kahoot activity. So instead, we'll just be doing a quick discussion where I'll ask questions like, what information surprised you the most? What is something that you found interesting? Which hominid group were you most interested in? And what is something you learned from the reading? I'll then pass out the technology and go through a quick reminder of the Kahoot rules and expectations in case there are students that haven't used the program before, and I'll allow time for students to log into their computers. Then with the time that we have remaining, we'll be doing kind of my assessment of their learning through the Kahoot activity, where we'll go through and we'll complete the game, and I'll be able to kind of assess what students were able to learn and how completed their hominid timeline is based on how quickly they're able to respond to the questions. The URL for the game is right here, and that's what people who are accessing the game would need to type into the search bar. However, students, when they're logging in, would only need the game pin, and obviously the game pin would look different depending on when you're logging in. Now, the actual Kahoot game is here, along with some of the questions that I've created. There's 15 questions. Definitely didn't want to do too many questions because we'd only have about 20 minutes left at the end of class. But it kind of just goes through each hominid group and asks questions about what their key capabilities were and when they survived, which are the most important things that I want students to take from the lesson. So, for example, the Homo habilis group was known for making what key to survival, and as they are the handyman group, the answer would be that they were known for making tools. So students just kind of get to go through and answer these questions, and then my last question for them, the one that I allow 90 seconds for, is which correctly completes the list of hominid groups from oldest to youngest. So this is where their timeline really comes into play, and they only have to know the nicknames for this question, but it's still getting them to picture the different hominids and what order they would go in through time. The last thing that I wanted to show you was the activity timeline sheet that students would have. As they're reading the text, they would list the name of each hominid group, as well as the nickname that goes with that hominid group. So, for example, Homo habilis would go here, and then Handyman would go here as their nickname. The students will then list the time period that that group was on Earth, and then list the key capabilities that went with that group. Down at the bottom, they're using the line to create a timeline where, again, they are visually putting the scientific names of each of the 5 hominid groups, as well as the time period underneath for which they lived. And that completes my technology-based or game-based learning for early hominids. Feel free to use it at your leisure, and hope you guys enjoyed.